RGB lighting feels kind of like the final frontier for affordable and versatile lighting for filmmakers, both in terms of the industry overall, but also in terms of my own personal kit. Maybe it is just me, but if you are like me, you might have a few small RGB lights laying around, like a tube or something, but a legit professional RGB light that could also double as a decent bicolor light is harder to find than you might think, and even harder to find for a decent price. That's where Ulanzi comes in, dropping this actually kind of incredible 120 watt bicolor RGB light, and with a ton of features that I've only seen on much more expensive lights, or some features that I've never really seen at all. So let's get into this overview and see if this thing can live up to its promises. I just want to say that Ulanzi did send me this light for free, and one of the few things I actually asked them to send me, just because when I saw the design and some of the features it offered, I just knew I had to see if this thing was any good. So let's check it out. And if you're convinced that this light would add to your production value or make your life a little easier, I do have some affiliate links down below. I made one specifically for this product, and I have one for Ulanzi's site in general. They make some pretty good stuff if it's right for you. So if this video helps you with your purchasing decision at all, please consider checking those out down below. And while I'm going to go over some issues I have with the light at the end, there's actually 3 main reasons we're going to get to why this light is just that incredible for me, but we'll touch on that as the video goes along. So yeah, in the box, you're going to get a really decent looking 120 light, the bracket and L bracket for mounting, and a power cable. One thing I did notice was missing was a reflector dish. Most lights do come with that, but it's really not something I use that much, honestly. And of course, the whole light is built on the standard Bowens mount, so you can use all kinds of Ulanzi or any other Bowens mount stuff. So you probably got a few reflectors lying around. I guess just use those if you need them, but it is an interesting omission that most lights do have. Either way, I'm just really glad they didn't go with some proprietary mount for this, because I do not love when companies do that. Their soft boxes have a really super fast fold out design that I think is actually pretty genius. So even if you don't get this light, you might want to get one of these soft boxes because they work well, and I love this design. Build quality is average, I would say, maybe on the good side of average. Not super luxurious, but not super cheap either, with some basic power controls, a scrolling wheel, and some other controls. Again, the screen, I'd say it's above average, but nothing amazing, but it doesn't really have to be. It does its job, it displays the information just fine. I also do kind of want to talk about the weight really quickly and the size. It is really a pretty small light, and at only about 2.5 pounds, it's pretty easy to just hide in a backpack or something along those lines. So that's definitely a really fun benefit to this light as well. We'll go into the different modes in just a second, but the first notable thing I alluded to in the intro was the power mode. So of course we saw the power cable that goes underneath, but you may have noticed this light has a V-mount plate directly integrated into the back of the light, which is kind of sick. I'm a complete V-mount convert, as you may know, as of last year. Having any light or camera I own really just being powered by V-mounts. And so having a light that can just slap a V-mount on the back, no cables or anything, it's about as useful as you would think. And while the light isn't the most powerful in the world, at 120 watts, it is decent enough to be generally useful as a bicolor light. And all those controls on build quality and everything is pretty much up to standard that you'd expect from any modern light out there. The second big reason is that you are getting, again, a COB 120 watt light that is RGB, or I guess more accurately HSI, hue saturation intensity. But yeah, the ability for a fairly powerful RGB light with a Bowens mount, 120 watt power, with 2 different ways to power it in one relatively affordable, relatively small package. That is just really cool as a narrative and creative filmmaker. And I can see myself using this in a lot of standard ways, just like the bicolor mode, as well as a lot of run and gun battery powered RGB creative ways. And on top of the, normal Kelvin modes and the RGB modes, there's obviously a bunch of creative modes as well. And speaking of that, to select those creative modes or anything on the camera, the best way to really do that is the app. And I resisted these apps for a long time, but the moment you put a light way up in the air and then you can just turn it on and off and change the settings from the comfort of your chair behind a camera doing an interview or something like that, you will be convinced, because it is way better than pulling that light down and up and down every time you have to change the setting just a little bit. So overall experience with this light was really great, but yeah, let's get into some negatives. And first is going to be that L bracket. So it says it's 360 on the website and all these marketing and things like that, but the second you have V-mount attached to that, it's going to get in the way. So maybe they needed a slightly bigger bracket. Maybe they just didn't care. It's not a huge deal, but I just wanted to note that that is going to get in your way sometimes. And some of the controls, while they're good enough, I definitely, when switching between like hue, saturation, intensity, or Kelvin and intensity, my temptation was always to hit one of those buttons to switch, which would inevitably start kicking off a party mode or some sirens, or just turn the thing off completely. So it just never felt intuitive or snappy to me, especially compared to the app, where things just change with just the tiniest bit of like the Bluetooth delay. Speaking of the app, it's not perfect either. There is sort of a thing where when switching things in the app, like especially with the RGB, switching to those main color presets, maybe this was just me and I was doing something wrong, but it would always default to 100% strength and 90% saturation. So even if I change intensity or change the saturation, when I selected like the green preset, it would snap back to those. So I kind of wish the saturation and the intensity would be unaffected instead of baked in. That could be a firmware fix or even an app firmware fix, but that was a little strange to me. Where I would say the last thing with the app is just, or the light in general, is those effects we talked about earlier. I think with the normal bicolor version of this light, there's like 8 effects. So that means there's like 20, I think, effects total. So there's like at least 12, maybe 14 effects that are enabled with the RGB, but there's nothing crazy. Some are fine. Some are kind of like unusable for me, just in terms of like, it's not really working as well as I would want or looking that good. And the biggest problem compared to some other lights would be none of these effects are editable. You can't affect the intensity or the speed or create presets or anything along those lines that a lot of other lights would enable you to do. So it is what it is. It's not the end of the world, and I don't use effects that much anyway, but they are useful once in a blue moon. And when you do need them, a lot of times it is for a really specific reason. So yeah, there is that. But overall, I think this light is fantastic. I think if you need a pretty strong Bowens capable, you know, V-mount battery powered light for creative RGB uses, this is the only light I can think of that does all that stuff. And for the price, it is really, really solid. So yeah, I had a great time using this light, and I cannot wait to see what creative options would be unlocked for me in the future with this thing. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think of this thing down in the comments. Are you gonna pick one up? You know, like, what would you do differently? Is there any improvements you would make? And while you're down there, like, subscribe, and if you did subscribe, see you in the next video.